Welcome everyone to our Lenten formation program for Divine Word Parish. And I first of all want to thank you for the effort that you've taken by signing up and taking on the challenge of reading Bishop Robert Barron's book, This Is My Body. What we're going to try to do over the course of the next couple of minutes is just to try to explain, maybe in a little bit more simpler way, as to what Robert Barron is getting at in the first chapter. And I'm really going to focus on the whole idea of the idea of God and his desire for us to share a sacred meal with him. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to think of a time in which you shared a meal that was something that meant something important to you, and it has stuck in your mind, and you often may go back and think about that moment that you had. It might be a time that you shared with family. It might be at Easter or Christmas. It might be a time that you shared with friends in a restaurant. And then I want you to think about what made it so special. Like why was this meal that I remember such a special time with the people that were around that table? The reason I say that is God places Adam and Eve in the garden at the beginning of creation. And he set us there because he believed that this was a place that we needed to be and that we wanted to be. And it was a place that God felt that we could participate in his life by enjoying his life through eating and drinking. So if you think about it, there's all of what humanity needs is in the garden. And unfortunately, Adam and Eve decide on their own that their life is going to be determined by what they want. And so they listen to the serpent, they take from the tree of knowledge, and it was the one tree that God said, you cannot participate in eating from this tree. And the reason is because God knew that they couldn't take it all in. And they were tricked into thinking that if we take from this tree, that they could become like God. So their pride got in the way, selfishness got in the way, their egos got in the way. And from that moment on, God had to have a rescue plan for all of humanity, because we're going to find out, especially in this first chapter, that this relationship with God was continually broken and then mended and then broken and mended and broken and mended. So God desires for us to participate in a sacred meal. I mean sacred because he believes this is the way that he can kind of recapture us and heal us and give us what we need so that we can be in right relationship with him. So let's now think about some of those meals that we know of that take place in the Old Testament. Immediately our minds should go back to the time of Moses and the Israelites, and the meal, as you all know, is the Passover meal. So the Passover meal was first of all given to God as a way of protecting the firstborn in each family from the angel of death. And if we know that plague, the lamb's blood on the doorpost, the angel of death passes over. And while that's going on, the families are in the household around a table sharing the meal, remembering this moment, because this is their moment that they will find out is a moment of liberation, of freedom from slavery. And it's also a moment in which God uses this meal to unite all of Israel. Kind of keep that in mind as we go through these next several meals that we'll talk about. So they sat in their household around common food. And somehow around common food, God is going to do his work for the people of Israel. The Passover meal, as it was said, as Barron says, is a seed in which the family of God will grow. Why do I say that? Why does Barron say that? Because he knows, the people of Israel knows, that they are in a sense watching God intervene in their life and bringing them out of slavery, and will guide them out into the desert, and eventually they will find what God will say to them is their right land, their promised land. So what the next meal that we see is the poetic imagery that Isaiah has at the beginning of his book. And Isaiah shows us that this meal takes place on a holy mountain. Now think of that. That imagery of a mountain in the Old Testament is so prominent that the people of his day, and even the people in the New Testament, the mountain is the place where you encounter God. It's the place where the people go to offer right praise and right worship. It's the place where God instills his life into them. And Isaiah has this image of this mountain where God is going to provide juicy, rich food and pure choice wine, and they're going to partake. And again, what's this going to show us? Well, in this relationship that we call a covenant, God is providing for his people who have, up to this point, consistently broken the covenant. Whether it's Abraham, whether it's Moses, whether it's David, all through those generations, the covenant is established, it's broken, it's reestablished, it's broken, and it's reestablished. It's the hope that what happens on this holy mountain that Isaiah is describing will bring a lasting friendship between God's people and himself. This is the place where nations come together and that there is no war. This is the imagery that Isaiah is using. This is the place of right worship. Take those images that I've just given you about Moses and about Isaiah. Now let's flip all the way to the New Testament, and we see that in Jesus' ministry, eating a meal is very prominent. And he kind of extends it even to the margins. So Jesus eats meals with sinners and with friends. The meal is a part of the solution for a sin-sick soul. That's what Barron tells us. Think of the calling of Matthew, okay? The calling of Matthew. Matthew is a tax collector. Matthew's at his custom post. Jesus invites him to be a part of his group. The rest of the group and the Pharisees, the religious leaders, are going to be upset because they know that Matthew is one who has cheated the system. He's a representative of the Roman Empire, the oppressors, and they're going to wonder, why is Jesus calling this man to be a part of us? The first thing that Jesus does with Matthew is he wants to go to Matthew's house and to share a meal. That sounds kind of really strange, but the meal is a part of the solution for a sin-sick soul. And what it says to us is that he invites people to be with him before he sends him out to do his work. Jesus, I believe, gets people around the table because at the table, he's able to share life with them. People are at ease with him, and they can get to know him, and it's becoming, they become a part of who he is, and he becomes a part of who they are. How can we best sum this up in terms of the liturgy as Barron gets into the closing parts of his first chapter? What Barron would say is that the liturgy, the Mass, sums up all of creation, all of the fall that happens in the Garden of Eden, the formation of Israel from its beginning to its working out to its very end, the Passover to freedom, the vision of Isaiah's holy mountain, table fellowship with Jesus, the Last Supper that he shares with his friends, and the eschatological banquet. That sounds like an awful lot. Eschatological meaning that the goal of where we hope and desire our spirit and soul will be after this life has ended and being in union with God. Take all that in. All of this is culminated in Jesus feeding us with his food, with himself. That's what he offers us at Mass each day. The first move of the Eucharistic liturgy, we gather people together. there's this whole sense that no one should be left out. There should be no obstacle that anyone should have to incur or prohibit them from gathering with us. And once we're assembled, we sing our opening song to give the sense that we're one voice as we gather as one people. This Mass, this liturgy, is the ultimate sacred meal. It becomes more than just a call to nonviolence or non-domination. It really is a call to anticipate that the world is going to be transfigured. It's going to change. We do not just listen to the words of Scripture and the teachings of Jesus. We do not just call his memory and spirit to mind, but what we're doing here is we're eating and drinking of him, and he becomes incorporated into us. Jesus' work continues in the world through the body. As we take him in, we become one with Jesus, but we also become one with each other. And so we, in a sense, incorporate what we call the body of Christ. What's the body to do? Well, we're supposed to reach out to those who are hurting and who are needed, and reaching out to those who are on the margins. Just as Jesus sat with sinners before sending them, Jesus sits with us at his sacred meal. He feeds us, and then he sends us out. If I could summarize this, and you can read along with me here, but I think it speaks very well of what Barron is trying to say, what the sacred meal means. The sacred meal for us, the Mass, the liturgy, is a history of salvation, is God's attempt to draw the human family into relationship that mimics the love that God has for us. This family love is best expressed through the biblical images of the sacred banquet that has been going on since the very dawn of creation. The Eucharist sums it up and brings it to its perfect expression. I hope that as you have heard my words today, that it kind of gives us a sense of what Barron is trying to tell us in the great gift that we have in the Eucharist, and why we uphold Jesus and his body and blood and revere it so much in our liturgy and in our church. Thank you. Welcome back. I have a couple of friends with me from the parish. This is Maria Skribek and Deacon John Grazia. And we're going to just have a short discussion on the first chapter of This Is My Body, where Barron really emphasizes the whole idea of the sacred meal and what it means to us as Catholics. One of the things that I thought that was significant when I was reading this is when he starts to talk about Jesus. He says, Jesus in the meal is different than the other meals that we hear about in the Old Testament, because Jesus actually becomes the meal itself. And that's what makes us, revere the meal, adore the meal, and that we, in a sense, through the sharing of this meal, we're incorporated into his life. And that makes him different for us. Only God can do that. So this is God's greatest gift to us. I was just running on your part. What kind of was significant or enlightening for you in that first chapter?
You want me to go first, Maria? Well, I just, every time he talked about the meal in that chapter, it just brought back so many memories for me of all those meals of having them. Growing up in an Italian household, the culture of the Italians are, you get together and you break bread. I mean, that's what we do. And everything we've ever done as a family, it's always revolves around breaking of bread and a meal. And even on Sundays, every Sunday, we would go to church, and then we would come back and go get together with all of our family, all my aunts and uncles, all my cousins. It was the extended family, because we didn't have a lot of them here, but that's how we got together at least once a week on a Sunday to have a meal together. Yeah. And all of our memories come from that.
Sure. And good things happen.
Yeah, we had a lot
Usually
of fun.
We
have some fights too, so
but
not everything is good.
Good things happen around food.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good.
Absolutely.
Good.
And that was the same in our family. We loved having supper together. That was one of the times of the day where everybody just brought their day to the table, and we often laughed, we talked. The kids had to help with sometimes making the meal, but it was our way of connecting, the unity as a family. And I grew up where on Sundays we would always have the Sunday meal was the best meal all week.
Yep.
And I just remember how much preparation went into it. And it was like after Mass, we'd all get together, and it was just one of my favorite memories.
And did you guys do where, you didn't miss meals, right? Even during the week. It wasn't just the Sunday meal. You had to be at dinner when your father got home. At least when my father got home, we never ate before my father got home. And it was always together as a family. And I know that's different today, and we're probably showing our age by that. But that was so important in our household because you're right, Maria, that was where we had all of our discussions. All the family things that we needed to decide or what was going on was done at that meal. And it wasn't just food, it was all of that other stuff that came with it. And those are things that my brothers and sisters and I still talk about.
Sure.
Who was fighting not to sit next to Dad because you were in swinging distance, right? If you said something wrong. But it's all those things, that camaraderie. And maybe because today that we don't have that, I see that in my own household. It's tough to get my kids all together to have a dinner, even when they were growing up, because of all the events that we go to. We're busy people. We're going to sporting events. We're going to all kinds of things, dance recitals, whatever it is, that the family unit has lost that sense of getting together for that meal on a daily basis.
I think Jesus kind of struggled with the same kind of situations. There were times in his ministry when he had lots of people, and there was very little provisions for him or his disciples to have a meal. And actually the disciples would tell him, just tell the crowd, since you're the one who has control here, just tell them to leave. And Jesus says, wait a minute, we have to feed these people. How much food do you have? And inevitably, he would take what little food there was, and it would become an abundance. Or we could say that Jesus, going back to the whole calling of Matthew and sharing a meal with someone whom maybe we wouldn't sit down with, he did that for a reason, And then of course the Last Supper has its deep meaning into what happens the next day. So the meals have a much deeper meaning, and I think that the underlying theme of that first chapter is this: it unites people together. He didn't want to provide any kind of obstacle. He didn't want to provide any kind of limit as to who could gather around the table. He wanted everybody to know that the meal that I'm sharing is for the entire world, and that's why Barron talks about like the transfiguration of the world. We don't hear that very often, and it's through sharing in a meal. So when we come around the altar, I might not know everybody in that church, but we're all there for the same purpose, and it's to incorporate us and unite us as one.
Yeah, I think that, we have the perfect example of going out on the margins and having this, right? And why do we have soup kitchens and food pantries and that kind of thing? We always seem to bring food into, even when we're going out to these people on the margins. We're replicating what Jesus did.
Right.
And again, when you share that meal, it becomes something different. That relationship changes. And I think that's what we find in the Eucharist, right? Is we don't know everybody there. None of us do. There isn't a person in that church that knows everybody that's in attendance, right?
Sure.
We may know faces, we may know people, but that's part of it. We become one by that Eucharistic meal that we're sharing with Jesus and God being the center of it.
Yeah. And if there was, I guess, one other thing that I would say is that the meal itself is healing. The liturgy provides a certain level of healing for us, that that healing takes place in a context of community, and that we we understand that Jesus is trying to bring the relationship of God by what he offers us in the Eucharist back into one united family. Okay.
that comfort meal thing that we were kind of talking about, that
Yeah.
Jesus brings that comfort to us in the Eucharist, is just take it over to what we do in funerals. After a funeral, what do we have after every funeral?
Right.
We have a comfort meal. Everybody gets together and breaks bread, and we remember the people that we have just buried. And it's kind of like what we're doing when we're at the Eucharist, right? We're remembering Jesus, every part of that.
The image that Mother Teresa had in her chapels with the words, "I thirst."
Yeah.
Well, Jesus is thirsting for our souls, for us to come to him. And that image just popped up when I was reading this book. The desire for unity, no matter who you are, what your background is, Jesus desires us as we are.
I think that's what we need to discuss as we go forward, right? This is Jesus, the Mass and the liturgy is Jesus coming after us, and he wants to repair all of the times that we've broken that covenant that we talked about in this chapter. And let us be able to be open to that and continue to come to him, to open that line of communication and do it through a meal, because that's what we're most used to doing.